let us talk about the Ford Foundation project and Just Films, and maybe you can step back and tell us what the initiative Just Films was, and now that you're there, what that's going to mean for it.
So well, I guess first I want to say that sitting here in this chair, I think of me as a channeler much more than an autocrat. So I try to do my best to be on the ground as many places as I can be, listening to people and trying to absorb where the field is, what the needs are, what the gaps are, and what people are really talking about. And one of the big filters that I have is what's not being done that needs to be done. Not what's everybody else doing that's a proven success, but what needs to be done that maybe has to be nurtured or has to be built or has to be seeded in some way. And if I see other people doing something that is really going well and strongly, then I'll tend to think about other things that need to be done that might be a little bit more complicated or a little bit more difficult. And I try and vet that as much as possible by talking to people. So one of the things that I'm doing is thinking, well, first of all, working very strongly as a team at Ford. I worked really strongly as a team at Sundance, so there was a lot of input both from the advisory level. We had a group of standing advisors, and there is one here whose name I will not say because she hates to be called out, but this was a hugely important group of people that would constantly in the labs bring in their intelligence about what was going on and their best thinking about what they thought needed to happen. So from that standpoint, from the staff standpoint, and then just in the field, being in the field and doing things like this and hearing from people what they think is the most important thing and what they think is working. So that's the way that I am already working at Ford. If you're in this room, you probably have an idea what Just Films is meant to do, what it's trying to do. Orlando Bagwell was the previous director, and he really, with Luis Sibáñez and Darren Walker at Ford, literally invented this and has done an enormously fantastic job within the foundation messaging about the importance of particularly nonfiction storytelling and its power to amplify and accelerate so a lot of different issues, but the ones that they prioritize are the ones that Ford is doing. And he ran it for now 3 years. So we're 3 years into a 5-year commitment on the part of the Ford Foundation. We have 2 years left. And so for me coming in as the new director, that's a $20 million commitment, $10 million a year for 2 years. And what it really is an attempt to also help Ford understand how they can reinvest in this and recommit to this, which I think that they have every intention of doing, but the what of that and the how of that is going to be written over the next 2 years, learning the lessons of what's happened over the past 3 years and then what we're going to do in these next 2 years. So that gives you a kind of an idea about how we're trying to think about shaping what we're doing. The way that it was designed was to be about I want to say 1/3 of the $10 million a year was meant to go to organizations, ITVS, Tribeca, and Sundance. Three $1 million grants a year, and that commitment was made for 5 years. So that will continue. That's publicly said. We're not going to back off of that unless Darren proclaims something completely outside of that, but I don't expect that. So that is a good chunk of the $10 million that we're looking at. And those organizations will have a role to play, and we can talk about how you can access those funds, because a lot of them are using it for regranting. And I was one of the recipients at Sundance, and that's kind of how I got to know everybody at Ford Foundation and Just Films. So that's a good piece of it. And then a large portion of it was actually for single films that had something very, very close to do with Ford Foundation priorities. So Gideon's Army is a perfect example. How to Survive a Plague is another example. And these films got a rather large investment of $200,000 to $300,000. That was not unusual. But there were only sort of 8 of those a year or 10 of those a year. And they were sort of big funding for films that a lot of people within the foundation and all of their grantees and stakeholders could really get behind and use. And so that was how the portfolio was divided up. And we're doing an evaluation right now. All of the grantees, all of the people inside the foundation who are stakeholders, and then I have about 10 people being interviewed. I think you're one of them, actually. 10 people, field people being interviewed about what's going on globally with nonfiction and visual storytelling. Where can we make a mark? Where can we have the most impact? What's working? How, importantly, I think for this room, how do we keep creativity and authorship at the center of the discussion so that we don't move into the commission realm and we don't move into the commercial realm? We stay non-commercial. I think the old word, the catch-all phrase was independent. I'm not sure that that word works so well now.
In the Ford world, when they look at the portfolio of films they've worked on in the last 3 years, how do they judge success?
I think that it's going to be a lot of the same answers that you all would judge success: critical acclaim, awards, nominations. And I think that one of the things that all of us are struggling with to get right is the question of impact and metrics and evaluation. And that's something that, in terms of thinking about the priorities of Just Films, that we're going to definitely concentrate on and seed some new work in this area. I would love to be able to have in the next 2 to 3 years a way of evaluating the impact of films that's broadly understood by major donors, that is consistent across different organizations, and what those questions are and how we understand how something like film works is a question that we're asking. We know it's not simply numbers. So in fact, we were just doing a report on last year's work, and I actually listed 3 areas of metrics, and I'd love to hear what other people are thinking about or coming up with. But it's obviously quantitative: ticket sales, how many people are seeing it, broadcast, et cetera. Qualitative, my life changed, policy changed. But then I think there's a third arena, which is the thing that dimensionalizes everything, which is the move in the dynamic movement across social networks. So changes in knowledge networks, changes in relationships, changes in understanding where power lies and how it's affected and how it's most efficiently moved toward the goal that you want to see. So if you look at something like, I'll just choose Dirty Wars because Anthony's here. If you look at something like a film like Dirty Wars, which brings a huge amount of attention to a particular issue, has a book, has a journalist in the center of it, Jeremy Scahill. There are all these different ways that it's drawing attention to its particular issue, which make it a part of a recurring news cycle, both in broadcast, in print, in book form, in press. So we want to understand those mechanisms better, and we want to understand how people in their changing positions of power can actually be reached and turned in a way, even if it's ever so slightly, towards something that's more progressive, towards something, that Ford would call, for instance, a social justice end goal. So that's the beginnings of that conversations, and how we begin to understand changes in social dynamics is something that we're funding something called Context. I don't know if you've heard about that. We're gonna roll out next year, which is a big data research tool that actually tells you sort of instantaneously by searching all publicly available data on the web where conversations lie and where the networks are.
Sounds like the NSA.
It is the NSA, but for us. It's the reverse of the NSA. But it's fascinating because you can actually track changes in discourse using this, and what she's designing it for is for filmmakers. And so what she'll do is upload the transcript of the film, not the visuals of the film, but the transcript of the film. And she'll actually be able to say to you, based on the text and how many times things are mentioned and talked about in the film, she'll say, you may think your film is about this topic, but in fact your transcript doesn't actually have too many references to that topic. So the way that it's being seen and talked about is over here as opposed to where you think it's going. So you have to come together in a way with your film and your impact strategy. That's just one intervention. It also does reporting on after broadcast, where the press is, where the discussions are. It tracks social, so it goes through Facebook, Twitter, all of the different ways that people are talking about films, and it gives you a way to concretely understand who's discussing what and where the conversation is going. And that's just the beginnings of, building metrics and evaluation tools around how it is that we make change in the world today.